Hi, I'm Bob McCoskrie. Welcome to Straight Talk. This is our 17th episode, and we're not going to muck around tonight. Let's get straight into the panel. We have got a beautiful lineup for you today, starting firstly in the Deep South, and our regular Bruce Logan. How are you, Bruce?
I'm very well, thank you, Bob.
Good to have you. Our special guest, super sub with a explosive run off the bench, and it's Brendan Malone, also in Christchurch. Is that Christchurch in the background, Brendan?
Yeah, that's actually Rangiora you can see in the background. Trust me, it's true. It's not disinformation.
That is. I'm going to report you to the Disinformation Project. And we also have the, we know this because we saw her in person today, the beautifully pregnant Ala. 1 month to go, isn't it, Ala?
Correct. Evening, everybody.
Nobody's
Very
counting down,
right
are they?
now,
Okay. Nobody's counting down, are they? There's no thing on the wall, a calendar counting down the number of days or anything?
Just you, Bob.
I'm counting down. I'm very excited. I've got a wall chart with a chocolate for each day leading up to the birth, so I'm really enjoying this. Christine and Taupo, how are you?
Good evening, Bob. Good, thank you.
And right up north to Dr. Sri Trotter, and, just out of Welsford. That's correct, isn't it, Sri?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Now, one correction, one fact check. A few weeks ago, we discussed concerns around the Life Education Trust, and the suggestion was that they may be government funded. We have been informed that they don't take a cent from the government, so we stand corrected on that. And we're happy to be fact checked. If you want to fact check anything we say, email brucelogan@gmail.com with any complaints you have, and he will deal with them. Now, team, word of the week today is this word. How do you say it? Is it Wimminks? Wimminks. And according to a group based at the University of California, Wimminks is one of a few lexical and social phenomena, including the adoption of X in the naming gender-conforming individuals, genderqueer folks, no doubt they spell folks there, Folxs, two-spirit people, femmes, transgender folks, and non-binary people. Wimminks acknowledges that gender identity exists in a sphere, and one word has room for multiple gender expressions without weighing one more important than another. Here's the best bit. In addition, it highlights that more than one gender expression can be impacted by patriarchy, misogyny, and sexism. This term recognises that in the past, the history of feminism has included racism, transphobia, and harmful gender binary views. Awesome. So our campaign, What is a Woman, has now changed to What is a Wominks. And our video of the week actually came out from, you'll appreciate this one, Ala, this is from Lila Rose's Live Action, and it's an example of pro-abortion logic. You'll enjoy this.
It's been one whole year since Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Which means they've been making abortion illegal all over the place.
So these are dark times.
These are dark times.
Dark times.
Dark times.
Un tiempo muy oscuro. Because now that Roe v. Wade is overturned, a woman can get pregnant just from having sex.
Oh. I'm now seriously considering going down the dangerous path of abstinence until marriage.
I find myself in this really bizarre state where I'm asking guys about things like their values and trustworthiness before sleeping with them.
Before a girl will have sex with me now, she's asking me all these dumb questions like, do you love me? And what happens if I get pregnant? And do you have a job? Like, I don't know.
Abortion being illegal where I live has definitely raised the bar for which men I'll date and have sex with. And that's a terrible thing.
It used to be that if I got a girl pregnant, I would just force her to get an abortion. And I can't do that anymore. And that's awful.
I can't tell you how many first dates I've had in the last year where no sex happens. All we do is talk about who we are and get to know each other.
Ladies, if you haven't done it already, you need to get an IUD. This will make your uterus a toxic and hostile environment like it's supposed to be.
It's like now sex is such a bigger deal. It's not just about me using someone else's body to get myself off.
It's like the government is making me responsible for a bunch of stuff I shouldn't be responsible for, like my sex life and my children.
Why would I ever want to bring a child into a world like this? A world in which it's illegal to kill children.
I live in constant fear of a baby somehow finding its way into my uterus.
So these are dark times.
Dark times.
Dark times.
The overturning of Roe v. Wade did this to me. The Supreme Court of the United States put this inside of my body.
Okay, so new idea here. I think that a man and a woman, before they have sex, need to draw up some sort of contract that says, I promise to take care of you and you promise to take care of me, and we both promise to take care of any kids that we produce together. I mean, like, I know it's new, I know it's shocking, I know it's out there, but that kind of contract is the only way that I see us moving forward.
That's marriage.
No, it's not.
I will put a link to that. Great humour. I will put a link to that so that people can share that, because that's exactly what Live Action wants to do. And of course, that's Lila Rose's organisation, who spoke at the forum, and her presentation at the forum is up on our YouTube channel, as are all the international guests. So if you couldn't make it to the forum or you want to relive it, then go to our website. Right, let's get straight into the free speech moment. Three of you want to get something off your chest tonight. So we're going to start with Bruce. Bruce, you want to ask, what is civilization? I've actually got my Roger Thesaurus ready to go here so that I can interpret as we go. So your 90 or so seconds starts now.
I've been watching with some fascination the whole range of government ministers practicing the art of self-strangulation. And I thought of something I'd seen some years ago. I can remember watching with fascination, in 1969, the BBC series called Civilization, narrated by Sir Kenneth Clarke. Okay, I know 1969 is before a lot of you were born, but then lots of things have happened even before I was born. So I'll keep going. The program couldn't be made now for no other reason than we don't use the word civilization any longer. It's been replaced by culture. We're now taught ad nauseum that all cultures are equal. Politicised identity and its ill-educated bulldozer design of tribalism are sovereign. So what is a civilization? Well, Clarke tells us a civilization is characterised at least by a shared view of the transcendent, a sense of permanence, a rule of law, a strong civil society, respect for the past and hope for the future. A declining civilization forgets its heritage. It loses confidence in the institutions of civil society, the role of family, the church, and the voluntary institutions, and it loses the impulse to create wealth. Finally, it even forgets what it means to be human. The past ceases to be a teacher of any kind of wisdom, and the future merely the promise of a vanishing utopia. We know that decline is well advanced when traditional virtue ceases to be honoured even in the breach. Law struggles to find a new foundation, and in doing so, it hastens the decline. Incidentally, Western civilization very nearly lost its way during the Middle Ages, had it not been for some Irish monks and Charlemagne. Clarke called his first episode, on that very close call, by the skin of our teeth. I wonder if we have any skin left on our discoloured pearly whites now.
That's a great finish, Bruce. I was just hanging off that statement, thinking about it. Well done. Okay, let's move on to Cherie. And Cherie, your topic is our most precious resource, so your free speech moment starts now.
Yes, well, I'd like to draw your attention to this book. It's called Children Endangered Species, ? How the Needs of New Zealand Children Are Being Seriously Neglected, A Call for Action. And on the back of the book, we read, in this hard-hitting, provocative book, Auckland journalist Leslie Max challenges our performance in child health, education and welfare. She looks at the widespread abuse of children and the growing rate of violent youth crime and the effects of a damaged cultural environment. She concludes that it's time to take stock and to take action on behalf of our politically invisible children. So the interesting thing about this book is that it's a pretty incisive commentary, you would think, on where we are today with relation to children. But it was actually written in 1990, over 30 years ago. And it's hard to see that we've actually made any progress on these issues that Leslie Max has raised. In fact, I think we probably have seen a deterioration, even though this was a call for action and a highlighting of the problems that our society faces. And Leslie Max is now Dame Leslie Max. She heads up the Great Potentials Foundation. So her foundation runs programs like the Hippie Foundation or the Hippie Program, which works with parents and children. It has a mentoring program called Mates, and it also has community service programs, which covers things like health and education and providing wraparound services in vulnerable communities. So I think it's quite inspiring that Dame Leslie actually has taken action. She did the research, she wrote the book, and she has done something about it. And I feel like that's really encouraging for us too, that although the government certainly needs to do a better job in addressing these problems, that we can all do our part in trying to make a difference. And that may be reaching out to vulnerable children that we know or in the neighbourhood or their families. It could be supporting organisations like Great Potentials or other organisations that are out there. It could be encouraging your church to become proactive in the community. But we can't afford to sit back and watch generation after generation head down the same path. There needs to be circuit breakers in what we see happening. So I just shout out to Dame Leslie Max for raising these issues, for acting upon them. And I'll finish with a quote from her book, which comes from Rabbi Tarfon in The Ethics of the Fathers. And quote, "It is not incumbent upon you to complete the work, but neither are you free to abstain from it."
Yeah, I'm glad you gave a shout out to Dame Leslie Max. Christine, we had a bit to do with her during the whole child abuse, stop the abuse nationwide protest. She did some great work, didn't she?
Amazing woman. If only the things she'd done could have been taken and used throughout the country. And it may have extended to that. It certainly hadn't when you and I had that experience, Bob, but her work is outstanding.
Yeah. And she was formative with the Brain Trust, wasn't she?
Yes, she was.
Brainwave Trust, sorry. Yeah, she was big on the first 1,000 days of a child's life. Very important. All right, let's move on. And Brendan, you want to speak about the big news item of the day, which of course is, unfortunately, Kiri Allen and what we've seen. So, Brendan, your free speech moment starts now.
Well, I don't really want to relitigate too much, but as everyone knows by now, a senior minister in the government, or former senior minister in the government, who was a cabinet member and Minister of Justice, Kiri Allen, was caught last night after driving with excess alcohol, smashing into another vehicle, and then attempting to evade arrest. And she was arrested and charged with resisting arrest. Now, what makes this so serious is you have a current MP who has endangered lives in the community with their conduct. She still remains an MP. Now, she's resigned her portfolio. She's resigned as Justice Minister, and she's no longer a cabinet minister, but she still remains as an MP. And it seems to me, if this doesn't or isn't enough to trigger someone being dismissed from Parliament, I'm really struggling to see what kind of behaviour would be considered serious enough to dismiss you from Parliament. Not just that, but other MPs have actually rushed to her defence to proffer all sorts of excuses for this errant behaviour. Labour MP Damien O'Connor, when he was asked about this by journalists this morning, he said, well, SHIT happens. In other words, this is just another day for Labour, according to that sort of response. I don't think this is acceptable. I actually think it's perfectly rational and reasonable to expect that our MPs, regardless of their personal situations and the struggles they might face, that they will actually never engage in these kinds of behaviours. And if they do, they will be dismissed, not just from portfolios, but from Parliament. And I think such immoral behaviours should be called out with compromise. What exactly does an MP have to do to be dismissed if this behaviour doesn't actually cross that threshold? And is it any wonder in New Zealand society we are struggling right now in regards to virtue, and our governance is such a mess with this sort of basic disregard for virtue and accountability unfolding in front of our eyes? Now, just a final word to those who might say, well, I think it should be up to the electorate to decide what happens to an MP. Well, surely that would mean at the very least you would be calling for right now some sort of by-election in Kitty Allen's electorate to actually let them decide. If not, how else are they supposed to decide? It seems to me that imagine this situation had actually unfolded just a couple of weeks into her tenure. Would you expect an electorate to be lumbered for the remainder of the 3 years of her term in office with someone who effectively couldn't serve in any meaningful way and had this hanging over their heads? Surely the most appropriate response is if you break that contract with this sort of errant criminal behaviour, then you actually are dismissed as an MP. And if the electorate wants you back, you run again next time, and they'll choose to have you back if they're happy with you. If not, I struggle to see why or how you can remain in Parliament, and what sort of message is this sending to our society about behaviour, particularly the younger members of our society who are very aware of what's going on right now in this regard.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. Actually, I'm interested just to ask Christine and Ala if you want to comment. I actually posted a couple of weeks ago when things started to fall apart for her. I said that I was concerned that she had gone through a major cancer scare. She had stage 3 cervical cancer. She had treatment, and yet she was back at work within a very short time. I was stunned by how quickly that turned around. And I just wondered whether she put expectations on herself that just weren't fair, and also politics did as well. Maybe her party should have kept her safer. I'm not quite sure. What do you think of that, Christine? Do you think there's room for some understanding here?
I think there's some room for some understanding, but that doesn't take away the responsibility of any politician to live up to what the public expects of them. And I think she has had a hell of a time. It's been just one thing after another. And what a leader would normally do is make sure she was really well before she came back near anything. And I don't think that's happened. I think they're overwhelmed with their responsibilities and their inability to perform. And she is actually a victim of that. I think she should have been taken better care of a long time ago, and this wouldn't have happened. But nonetheless, it did happen, and you've got to face the consequences. It happens to us all, and people look to politicians to act differently. You know, there's been a lot of rumours in Wellington for a long time about things going wrong for Kiri. Someone should have acted on that before it got to this point, because she's done some really good work.
Okay, let's. Did anybody else want to comment on that? All good? You can include it in your comment on the next topic, because we want to just talk about that. The latest polls, both major parties are slightly down. Let's just have a look at that. Both National and Labour slightly down. The Greens got a little bit of a hike. And then if we look at the minor parties, I'm just interested to show you what One News highlighted. They said that Top got 2, Democracy NZ 1, Freedoms NZ 1, and One Party got 1. But then when you actually go and look at the actual results there, you actually see that, in fact, Democracy NZ, Freedoms NZ was 0.8, Democracy NZ was 0.6, which is Matt King's party, and Freedoms NZ is Brian Tamaki's party, and One Party is 0.5. And you'll see there New Conservative, which aren't mentioned at all, are on 0.4. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is if you total up those 4 minor parties there, 4 parties, combined total of just 2.3%. So, panel, what do we make of these results? Bruce, I'll start with you. It's still level pegging and nobody can pick a winner.
Well, yes, it is. There are a couple of interesting things for me. One is how ACT and the Greens will perform and just what will come out of that. And the other one, which I find most interesting, because we don't know how it's going to go and it could affect the outcome a great deal, is what happens to New Zealand First. If New Zealand First gets over the line, then it's going to be, I think, probably a definite National ACT government, perhaps even New Zealand First. But
And
it's
that's
New Zealand
them on
First at the
3.
moment that look interesting.
Yeah. So that's them on 3%, no change. So, but I expect some movement because there's something about Winnie when he gets in front of cameras and when he gets in debates, he always does very well. Brendan, what's your view?
Actually, I'm with Bruce on this. The most interesting thing for me really is I was going to say Winston first, Freudian slip.
Most people do.
First. Yeah, we all know what I mean. New Zealand first. I think Winston is back. I think he'll be in Parliament. I was watching yesterday. He's got some pretty solid policy proposals there. And here's my suspicion. I think this is something that polls aren't accounting for and people are not really considering. And that's the way psychology will play into it, getting close to the actual election day. And I think there's probably a core group of people who don't want to vote for either National or Labour, but they're quite happy to vote for Winston. They look at the other minor parties and maybe they're talking them up a bit at the moment, but their psychology will go, I don't know if they'll make it, but I think Winston can. And I think that will actually drive him across the line. And I actually suspect he's going to swallow up a lot of that smaller vote. I think he will be back. And I'm also at the same time, I'm suspicious of the polls. I'm not confident they're actually reflecting the general mood of the population. And there could be a lot of reasons for that. But I suspect that there's an appetite for change, but exactly what that means, who knows at this stage. But I think there's definitely an appetite for change.
Okay. Christine, I see you shaking your head. Are you agreeing or disagreeing?
No, I'm agreeing. I don't think the polls are reflecting what's happening out there. Everywhere you go, and it's not just with people that I would expect it from, everyone wants change. And I think what's happened today will reinforce that, what happened last week, things that happened post that last poll. Look, the Greens came out last week and said they were going to allow Maori to take back people's private land that had been stolen from. That should make the whole country frightened, and I'm sure it has, and I'm sure you'll see a result. And that all adds up to people looking to the safest option. I think I've been predicting a right landslide, and unless National or Act really blocked their copybook, and they could, anything can happen any day in politics. If they don't, I think you're going to see a really strong right coalition. I don't know if Winston will be there or not. Maybe he will. People seem to believe him every time, but he never delivers. And I will say that over and over again. He talks a lot, but he doesn't deliver. He delivered us Jacinda. He kept a handbrake on her. But look what we've had to live with since then. So I don't know, but I don't think the polls are accurate at the moment. Not at all.
Okay. Ala, do you agree? Can we trust the polls? And what do you think of the current polling?
I agree with Christine. I think people need to just keep in mind that polls are just a snapshot in time as well. And we're still, 80-something days out, and anything can happen at any day. So I think it's probably going to be a fight for the centre for both big parties. And I like what Brendan said in terms of strategic voting. They all, I think New Zealand First will make a comeback. I personally quite like Uncle Winnie. He is a true politician, but a character like him is needed in our house because we've just got a lackluster plate of leadership. Like nothing about our current both opposition and in-party leaders is inspiring or aspiring. But I think Winnie brings some of that spark that we need in our country right now.
Okay.
Bar the dishonesty part.
Okay. And Sheree, what's your thoughts?
Winston Peters. I guess the thing with Winston Peters is that he's an experienced politician, and when you compare him to a lot of these new parties, a lot of the new ones don't have any experienced politicians amongst them. So I think for a lot of people who are looking for something different, they would have more confidence in Winston as with that experience, but also they know what he stands for. He stood for pretty much the same thing apart from this aberration with Labour. He has pretty much stood for the same values throughout, 30 years. There is that. And I think another interesting thing about the polls with Labour and National being head-to-head is that It's also a very low result. They're head-to-head in the 30s, which is very low. And, it's showing that general lack of confidence in the community with the two main parties. And I think there's something that at least the media is ignoring, and politicians as well, is that the whole COVID and mandate process, I think, created a lot of disillusionment with the main parties. And to give Winston credit, he went down and talked to the people, and that's what people wanted to see, politicians who are willing to talk to them. And, National wasn't being the opposition at that point. They weren't sort of being critical of the government. They were going along with it. And I think this has also fed a lot of the interest in a lot of the small parties that are running. It's a shame that some of these small parties don't join together. I feel like they could. So I think that's a bit of a shame. But, there's certainly plenty of time ahead of us. It'll be interesting to see how it all pans out.
Okay, let's check some of the comments. Firstly, Colin says, Wominks sounds like something from Dr. Seuss, which is probably about right, Colin. Cherie, another Cherie, says, nope, you can't call us civilised now by going by that list. I think that's for you, Bruce. And Leslie's a big fan. Bruce, brilliant, Bruce. So absolutely spot on. Obviously, he's got a Rojo Thesaurus, so well done. Jeremy says, how about a Family First New Zealand book club? Good idea. I hope Sue Reed's listening and watching. Mark and Joanne says, yes, she should lose her job. I mean, not so long ago, hardworking people lost their jobs because they chose not to have a jab. And finally, Cherie, Winston can be the handbrake on excesses of larger parties. Which is true. I guess you could say the same about ACT and the Greens on a slightly different angle. Right, next story. This is an interesting thing to watch. National Party leader Christopher Luxon has hit back, and this is not to defend Christopher Luxon in any way, but it's just a warning to us about what we see. He's hit back because there was a video circulating online of him speaking to voters in Nelson. And meeting attendees were asking him about bilingual road signs, saying they didn't understand them, and they wanted some action. And so they posted a video on Twitter, and Luxon, in response, the first thing he said was, the first thing you got to do, buddy, is you got to vote October the 14th to get me there in government. So just have a watch of this little clip. And basically, he's given a roving mic to the crowd, and the crowd are sort of yelling out some stuff. Here's the video.
We're talking to you. We want some action.
Yeah, well, mate, the first thing you got to do, buddy, is you got to vote October the 14th to get me in there to government. So,
Okay, so he just naturally responds to whatever's said, and he said, vote me in and I'll fix out some of the things. Now, this is the danger of a roving mic, and you'll never see a roving mic at a forum on the family because generally the person with the mic becomes the third speaker. But what Twitter users have done is they've widely circulated the video, and left-leaning commentators have accused Luxon of cultivating the racist vote. But what did Luxon actually say? Here's the video of what he actually said.
Your broader point about Te Reo is, look, the average age of a New Zealander is 38, and actually many of us grew up actually learning the Te Reo version of the national anthem, and that's been fantastic. But for many Kiwis, they haven't had that opportunity, and it's really difficult. And I was in a meeting recently, and someone said to me, well, Chris, and they were actually quite apologetic and felt shameful about it, but they said, I don't know what the name of my, what the names of the agencies were. And I was thinking, well, Waka Kotahi is the transport agency, and Whatu Ora and Tipu Kinga, well, that's actually the health department, and that's also the polytechnics. And so I am of the view that we should rename our government departments in English so that people can navigate their government. But I'm also of the view that actually we should have Te Reo on there, and we can have dual language on it, but you have to have a choice, right? You have to be able to navigate it.
Okay, so totally different context, and unfortunately from experience, this is often what mainstream media and left-wing groups can do, and they've done for years. They chop up full commentary and take the comments out of context, which is why I'm wary of an interview that's pre-recorded for the news, unless you trust the reporter. Questions for the panel is basically, what is your source of information that you rely on, and how do you check whether the reporting is misrepresenting the facts? How would you, advise viewers when they're watching something as to whether they're getting the full story or whether it's being taken out of context to make the politician look bad? And this is not just about Luxon, it's any politician who's being misrepresented from what they're saying. So, Ala, I'll start with you because I know people are always misrepresenting you. What's your word of advice?
I think you've mentioned it a couple of times. Context is king. So making sure that whatever piece of information or news that you're consuming, that you're checking it against other valid and credible resources as well. Also checking for any sort of slanting that might emphasize certain viewpoints more than others. There's always two sides to a story, so keeping that in mind is also key as well. And with social media, sound bites gets clicks, negative news gets clicks. So I think anything you see online that's deemed as news, I would say take it with a grain of salt.
So, like just a little test here, Ala, there was an article in the Otago Daily Times at the weekend about Family First, which used the term Russia, Trump, Nazi, and far right. Would they be slightly loaded terms?
Absolutely. I presume they're talking about you, Bob. So I would context of those terms and the person being referred to with those terms as well. So
yeah. Okay, Christine, I'm sure you've been a victim of terrible editing. How do you get around that? And what's your advice to people who are watching this type of representation?
I don't know. I know it sounds strange, bearing in mind what I've been through, to say I don't know what advice to give, but it is really hard to get to the truth of something. The media are all powerful and they can write whatever they like. And I think it's becoming absolutely embarrassing, particularly with TV1, but TV3 is not much better. They are so pro the government that they distort just about anything else. They make excuses, they distort stories. It's just embarrassing. They must know that we can all see it. But I honestly don't know how you can check things out. I know that how it was distorted for me. There was no fighting back for a long time. I wasn't in any position to fight back. I was told I wasn't allowed to. I think it's different for politicians. They can set the record straight, but the damage is often done by them. And I think this campaign's going to be full of it. It already is. You know, was Mikey Sherman, I think, took a pot shot at Luxon tonight because he said, had Kiri Allen been one of his members of Parliament, he would have got a doctor to sign off that she could come back. That's what a responsible leader would do. Whether you were leading an organisation, you'd be looking after your person and making sure they were okay. They wouldn't make up their minds for themselves when they've been so sick and under such stress. But they literally said it's destroying people's honesty about having mental illnesses. I just thought that's just one tiny example of absolute distortion of the reality of the world.
Okay, Cherie, how do you discern what you're watching, what's fact and what's embellishment?
Yeah, you get a feel for where a particular journalist or television or program is coming from, like TV1 News. So I tend to read from a variety of sources across left and right, and just you sort of read them critically, knowing where they're coming from, but by reading a variety of sources, you come to see a clearer picture, I think, of what's going on. But I think also, if you can go straight to the source where possible, that's a good idea. And a lot of, particularly some of the smaller parties, have an online presence, and they will get their messages across that way. So I think there are ways around it, but it's certainly tricky. I have found actually watching Jack Tame on Q&A has been quite good, that he sticks to the line of questioning. So, and it's a longer format, so you can actually start to hear some answers. So, and I think that's part of the problem with news. Not only are they curating it so highly, but it's very short form, so you never get a full picture of anything.
Okay, just before we come to you, Brendan, Ronnie McDonald, no relation to Ronald, of course, says no one with a brain cell trusts New Zealand legacy media. the younger generation get their news online and see how corrupt our media is. So there we go. There's Ronnie. Brendan, what's your thoughts? I mean, actually, we've done a whole video podcast on this particular issue, haven't we? Discerning the truth.
Yeah, we have. I would say Cherie's advice is just spot on. One thing that I found really helpful is actually I'm a subscriber now to ground.news, and it's an overseas website. And what I really like about it is, for example, a big story breaks, including like Kitty Allen's story broke on there today. And what it does is you go to the site. It's not a news site. They aggregate. They publish lots of news sources. So you go to the Kerry Allen story on their site, and it gives you, beneath the headline, a whole lot of different articles from different news sources, and it tells you how high their factuality rating is for each story. Is it high factuality? Is it low? Is it mixed? And it tells you the bias. Is it left or right-leaning source? And it's really interesting. You can actually read across a story that way, and I found that a really, really helpful source, actually. So that's something I'd recommend. Okay. I think we need to be aware that this is going to be an issue. Karl Marx famously once said that he thought religion was the opiate of the masses. It was this thing that, like a drug, that dumbed you down and stopped you from having your rightful political revolution and throwing off the shackles of your oppressors. But the cultural Marxists who came after him, they thought that media was the opiate of the masses, the thing that dumbed them down. And that's why they've worked so hard to try and get control of media and to frame the narrative. And so much of what we see today is all about narrative framing. And I think that's important to understand when you're engaging with something. It's not simply facts. It's actually a presentation, a story about how you're supposed to think about those facts.
Okay, just quick question. I'm just having a look at the site now. Who does the fact-checking on the bias? It's not the Disinformation Project, is it?
No, they're actually quite good. And I found them pretty reliable. And because they don't produce news themselves, I found it fairly consistent. And it's very interesting to see where the factuality is, and that they're generally on the money. And you still, of course, can read all the articles for yourself. They don't censor anything out. You just choose what you want to read. Okay,
interesting. That's quite an interesting site. And they've identified The Guardian as left-wing, so that's a tick. Bruce, you've been watching the news. How do you discern the good stuff and what's just, fake?
Well, it was interesting listening to Brendan. I didn't know that site, but I'm probably old enough to sort things out for myself. A couple of questions I always ask. I try to discern the difference between opinion and news. Not always easy to do, but it's a question I think needs to be asked. And I always ask another question. If I've got somebody making a point of view about something, I ask, does this pose a threat to freedom and democracy, or does it not, or does it enhance it? In other words, is it something that's of value to my own existence, or is it something that detracts from it or would upset it? And I find that local media, the local mainstream media, are somewhat lacking in that area. For example, I wouldn't have found out that the two women who were recently paraded naked by the mob in Manipur, India, were Christian if I relied on TV1 for my news. They were tribal, according to that source. And so the wider range of sources you have, as Brendan's suggesting, is right on. It's obviously very, very important. I tend to go to a wider range of people for political analysis. I have my favourites, but I try to get a range from different perspectives, just not some that come from an algorithm that sort of regurgitates what I want to hear.
Okay.
And as one point, and I'd like to bring to you, seeing we've had one book mentioned already, but there's one just comes to my mind that I've just finished reading, and it's very appropriate to what's going on now. It's Nigel Bigar's book on colonialism. It's I think one of the most significant books on the topic written, and it attends to the issues that we are thinking about when we're hearing what's going on in the media right now, because we tend to get one particular perspective. But to get a balanced outlook, read Nigel Bigar's book. It's only been out a few months, and it's really worth reading.
Okay. If you could just send a copy to my researcher, Ala, and she can do a review for me while she's sitting around. Right. Now, speaking of media, as a special treat, we're going to, before we go on to our next topic, we're going to show you the promo for our What is a Woman campaign. the campaign that the editors of the major daily newspapers appear to have colluded to block, and as a result saving us thousands of dollars but giving us significant public advertising for free. So thank you, editors. Now beware, viewers, what you're about to watch is highly sensitive and goes against the values of the Stuff News website. Hide your children. Here we go.
Here is one of the most difficult questions you can ask in our culture today. Are you ready? Thinking caps on, dictionaries and encyclopedias at the ready. Here's the question. What is a woman? A woman always has been, always will be our beloved mothers, grandmothers, wives, daughters, sisters, aunts, adult human female. But the extreme gender ideology being pushed in the media, educational institutions, government ministries and the corporate world includes trying to redefine what a woman is. How do we target specific women's health issues or target the gender pay gap or violence against women or women's refuge or uphold our nation's history of fighting for women's rights if we can't define the target audience in the first place? It demeans mothers, it demeans women, it denies nature and biology. It cancels women. To say pregnant people and to deny mothers giving birth is to perpetuate a dangerous lie and deny biological reality in order to appease a radical sexual and gender ideology. We need to counter this agenda. The main objective of the What is a Woman campaign is to communicate a truthful, biologically correct, common sense definition of woman that has been carried down through generations and cultures. If a politician can't define something so basic, so fundamental in who we are as humans, why would you trust them with any other decision? Please join our campaign. As we said, the main objective of the What is a Woman campaign is to communicate an objective truth, biologically correct, common sense definition of women that is divinely designed and been carried down through generations and cultures. It's time to celebrate everything that is good and beautiful about women in our policy making, in our schools, in our communities, and in our workplaces and business brands. Go to whatisawoman.nz. Start the conversation.
Yeah, there we are. Is everybody okay? Anybody need a hug? That was pretty shocking, wasn't it? Banned.
Triggered, Bob.
Yeah.
Triggered, I tell you.
Banned by all the major newspapers because it was so upsetting. Right, moving on. Do we need to disagree better? Now, this is from the States. A Republican, a governor from Utah, and a Democrat governor from Colorado have come together and to talk about the importance of civility in politics, especially around the family table. So I'm going to show you this short video clip, and then I'm going to ask the panel whether they love it or hate it, and whether they think it's an important message for Kiwi families also. So have a watch.
I'm Spencer Cox, Republican governor of Utah.
And I'm Jared Polis, Democratic governor of Colorado.
And we're here to help save your family dinners.
You know what we're talking about.
You're halfway through your second helping of mashed potatoes when your MAGA uncle decides to share his thoughts on the latest election conspiracy.
We all have that uncle.
Or instead of passing the salt, your woke niece passes along a particularly controversial fact that she read on social media.
Or maybe you're the one with the strong opinions. You know you're right, and the other side is a bunch of misguided weirdos. But there's a healthy way to deal with conflicting opinions. Actually, it's okay to disagree.
It's not just okay, it's crucial.
Did you just disagree with me about disagreeing?
Healthy disagreement means not assuming that the other side is deluded, misinformed, or actively trying to overthrow America.
A little respect and curiosity keeps resentment off the dinner table.
And out of your social media feeds.
Our nation was founded by people who profoundly disagreed.
So next time your uncle, your niece, or anyone else brings up that one topic that just drives you nuts, take a deep breath.
Be curious, ask questions. If you still disagree, that's okay, but you might find that you aren't as far apart as you think.
Conflict isn't bad. It's the way we disagree that matters. Please join us in showing America the right kind of conflict.
Together,
we can disagree better.
All right, so the first time I saw this was actually Matt Walsh was playing it on Daily Wire, and he absolutely hated it. And as I watched it, I actually thought, it's quite good. So to the panel, love it or hate it. Let's start with you, Bruce. Do you love it or hate it?
Well, on a 54 and 100%, I 60% hate it, and I tolerate it, and the other. It's probably a matter of style. And it makes a very obvious point. We do need to be civil, of course. But civility alone is not going to solve our problem. I think we're in a situation, certainly in New Zealand and many other countries as well, where mainstream media and many businesses and probably a preponderance of academics are on the side of the debate that would shut everything down. And that, I think, is simply a matter of observation. And so civility helps, but it doesn't cut much ice with those who want to stop the debate going on. Now, my own experience would suggest that's true. I used to get a lot of stuff published in nearly every New Zealand newspaper. Now, no matter how important I think I'm saying something, there's no chance of it being published. One newspaper has actually told me so. So try and get something of a conservative nature published, even a well-documented piece on issues like climate change or the politicisation of sexual identity, partnership as a principle of the Treaty of Waitangi, positive discrimination, or the biblical underpinning of Western civilization. You just won't get it published, although they are all critical subjects shaping the way we think about the world. The problem is that the gatekeepers are so convinced that they are right, they seldom entertain the possibility of alternative views. And built into their understanding, it would seem that civility is taken for granted on their side, but disagreement is seen somehow or other as being hostile. And I'm not quite sure what you do about that. It's just, I suppose, those people like us just have to make our ideas bigger, bolder and stronger and clearer. I'm not sure what else to do.
Okay, Shri, I guess part of the uniqueness is that you've got a Democrat and a Republican sitting at the same table actually being nice to each other, which is kind of seems rare, doesn't it? Oh, looks like she's, sorry, we've lost Shri. We'll come back to Shri in just a sec. Christine, can I come to you? Do you love it or hate it?
Well, look, I believe in passionate debate, and I think the thing I liked about it was that it cancels the cancel culture. You know, people are allowed to have their views and they're not struck down because they're not meeting whatever the current criteria is. So I really like that about it. But Ala was saying before that this current campaign lacks any excitement and inspiration and energy except for Winston. And in many ways that's true. We do want passionate, exciting debate, something that inspires us about what our country's going to be and what kind of vision there's going to be. I don't want them really being nice to each other. I want them to have really great disagreements, I suppose, on the way forward. I don't want it to be dull and boring either. They should all be out there with loads of energy. And so I like the cancelling of the cancel culture because I think that's exactly what that does. But apart from that, I don't like it.
Okay. Shuri, have we got you back?
I don't know. Am I back?
Yes, we have. We got you back. So, you know, as part of the strength of it, having a Democrat and a Republican sitting at the same table, a bit like having a National and a Labor MP, you know, agreeing on something?
Well, I think civility is always desirable, isn't it? And I liked it. I think we could use more of that. And I think in our culture, we don't know how to disagree well. We seem to take things very personally. Often it's connected with identity. People take it as a personal attack if you disagree with them. And so I think there's a lot to learn in how to disagree well. Yeah.
Okay. Ala, did you love it or hate it?
I'm not one for American politics, so I'm indifferent. I do like Christine's point about, I guess, the the kind of passion and excitement that kind of ad generates is very American, which just makes me roll my eyes. That's not the Kiwi way to do things. I think we're very pragmatic people, and there is still, common sense still prevails amongst the majority of the public, apart from, I think he mentioned not to assume others that are in opposition to you are delusional. Personally, I would think some of them are delusional. Even if you present the facts with grace and mercy and love, there is, and I'm thinking more in terms of younger generations as well. So I do like the message in terms of the need for civility and robust discussion and debate. We do need to go back to that, but I would say our country we're a people of practical solutions. I think some people are fed up with the lip service and the discussion of ideas, and they want to get to the solutions. But I think what we need to remember is to get to solutions, they come from ideas. So we do need discussion. And I think the downside of that is apathy. Sometimes it feels like there's apathy amongst the general public in terms of politics. But on the other side of that, it's because look at what we've got. Like, it's like the B team All Blacks. We don't have the A team All Blacks. It's like the reserves that they pulled out of retirement. They've just pulled them together and given them a black jersey, and we're supposed to just band together and support them. That's probably a bad analogy. Sorry, All Blacks, but yeah.
Brendan, perhaps we should send this little video to the publishers of the Otago Daily Times and say, look, if you can have a pot shot at Family First for having a What is a Woman campaign, but allow the other side if you want to have this debate.
Yeah, I think I'm personally, I actually quite like the message. You could probably debate the delivery, and there's some other good points have been made here. But here's what I think. My caveat is this. What they want will not be delivered by the current society we're in, because what they actually need to ensure you have a return to civility and respect for the human dignity of another is you first have a recognition that they are sacred. They are made in the image of God. And to have that, you've got to have a sacred, transcendent belief in God that underpins your society. Otherwise, why should I debate with you in a civil way? Surely, if the further we move away from that sacred, transcendent idea about who we are in the West, the more tribal we become. We lose that sense of the common brotherhood and sisterhood of humanity because we don't recognize it anymore. And we see our opinion, our argument, our fight as being more important than even persons are. And that's why we're in the mess that we're in. So I love what they're trying to do, but I think what you've got to do is you've got to realize that you've got to have a return to virtue in your society, and that means you've got to have a society that recognizes that virtue is actually essential and important, and it's the very thing you must fight for. And then, and only then, I think will we actually start treating each other with civility, because we will recognize the human dignity of the other person that we're engaging with first and foremost above all else.
Yep. Okay, Liam says, we may believe in passionate debate, but we are left debating each other because nobody in the mainstream will allow anything controversial spoken, as you said, Bruce, and the parameters are ever narrowing. And Sheree says, debate is shut down, as Bruce said, only one view is given oxygen, and we saw that at the weekend, of course, with the coverage of our campaign. All right, we're doing fantastic, team. We might even finish slightly early, which will really annoy Ronji. We want to have a look at the National and Labor policies on law and order, and then just get you to comment on what you like and what you don't like. So here's a quick summary. For National, they wanted to do boot camps for 10 to 17-year-olds who commit a serious offence, electric monitoring, and be under intensive supervision order. They want to ban gang insignia, make gang membership an aggravating factor in sentencing. They want to limit the discretion judges have when sentencing convicted offenders, not more than 40% discount. Want to restore the 3 strikes law and improve access to rehabilitation programs when prisoners are in remand. On the Labor side, on the right, new offence to target ram raiding so that 12 and 13-year-olds can be charged. 2 new youth justice prisons, or they call them facilities to sound nice. Increased sentences for criminals who use or reward children for committing crimes. Posting offending behaviour online would be an aggravating factor. Young offenders to undertake community activities such as cleaning graffiti and picking up rubbish. Sounds like my kids. Circuit breaker fast-track intervention program for children coming back into the community, and new intensive and long-term programs for a small group of the most prolific recidivist young offenders. So anything good there and anything which is just a waste of time. Christine, you're the legal expert. What do you reckon?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Look, I just don't believe any of the Labor stuff. I truly don't. They've come up with that at the last minute as a reaction to Nationals' anti-crime policies. I just don't believe it. They haven't done any of those things. They've watched while crime has got worse and worse and worse and refused to do any of those things that they're talking about now. So I don't have any problem with what National has suggested. I really like boot camps. We used to have boot camps when I was Chief Executive of Income Support, and they worked brilliantly. I might have said before, I went to every passing out parade, and those kids used to cry and beg me not to send them home. They wanted to stay in the army. The army did the most magnificent job. And for all the people who say they don't work, yes, they do. And they make a huge difference in that person's life. I don't think we had one person who hated it by the end of the course. It brought about dramatic changes in people's lives. So no, I like all of the National list. I could like some of the Labor things, but I don't believe it. I think it's a load of rubbish. And if the Greens are there, none of that's going to happen.
Okay. Brendan, anything that warmed your heart amongst all those policies?
Well, for me, I'm similar to Christine, actually. Great minds think alike and all that. I look at the Labor list and I think, I don't know what they mean by some of that stuff. Like new offence for ram raids. That feels like the horse is already bolted. And why should there be a new offence? It's already illegal to take a vehicle and ram it through someone's private property, is it not? So it feels like tinkering with not much depth to it. On the National side, I like everything except the one area I'm concerned about is limiting the discretion of judges. Just like I don't want judicial activism where judges interfere with parliamentary processes, I don't want the Parliament interfering with the judges' courtroom either. I actually think that's the one that leaves me with a little bit of concern, because I imagine there might well be situations where a judge would be doing a very just thing if they applied prudence and took a bit more lenience. But what you don't want is you don't want that normalised. You just want that as a discretionary power when it's appropriate. And I feel that maybe removing it altogether isn't necessarily the answer either.
And isn't the public perception, though, is that it has gone too far and they're trying to correct it? Trying to pull it back a bit?
Sure. But I think it seems to me that what you could do is create good, solid sentencing guidelines. But it feels to me that this one goes a step further and just sort of prohibits what the judge can actually do in their courtroom. And I have concerns about that. They could be assuaged if I heard a really good argument, but that's the one thing for me that stuck out. Everything else I'm totally fine with. And by the way, I know some people have panicked a little bit about the idea of making gang affiliation an aggravating factor. So even if your crime had nothing to do with gang-related criminal offending, by being in a gang, that's considered, an aggravating factor, even if you've robbed a lolly shop, for example, and on your own. And I'm okay with that, because gangs exist solely to actually perpetuate evil, grave evil in our society on an organised and high level and consistent way. And you should be discouraged, actively discouraged, and punished for participating in any such an endeavour in a society, I think.
Okay, Ala, anything in this list that is fantastic? Anything that's just wasting breath?
All of them.
Which?
The only. I think it's lazy policy making from both sides of the house. I think the only one I like is National's improved rehab. I think all those things are distractions from where targeted and effective resources need to go, and that's into rehabilitation and reintegration. I think those two things aren't being talked about when it comes to tackling crime. Those things, the others, what they've highlighted, they're all policy. They're all band-aids really. We know we've got a broken prison system. A lot of what has come out of corrections in terms of some of the research that I've read is that there needs to be more resourcing put into reintegration. So post-release plans need to be more effective, or at least concrete. People need to come out of prisons with a solid what is next, but they reoffence because they don't have housing, they don't have good employment opportunities. I don't think education's done well in prisons. They need to look at education programs in prisons. Also, some of the rehabilitation programs aren't always as specific. They're not specific to certain offences. So I think there's a particular area when it comes to crime, or in terms of the prison nexus of things, that we aren't looking at, these politicians aren't looking at, because they're going to get votes based on what they've just put out, which I personally think is all rubbish, except the rehabilitation one.
Okay, Cherie, have you got any positive things to say about these policies?
Well, I agree with Ella that there needs to be more emphasis on rehabilitation and getting systems working properly. One of the problems at the moment is just the understaffing at prisons, and this is why prisoners are being locked in their room for hours on end, because they don't have enough staff. And this has been one of the problems that's come out during COVID and a consequence of that. So, they really need to work on improving their systems. I disagree with Brendan over gangs, because they're not gangs. The gang environment is not homogenous. They're not all of one kind. Certainly, there are those very criminal-focused gangs, but a lot of the gangs are generational whānau-based gangs who've been part of communities for up to 50 years now, and there are many trying to work, within their communities, which are gang communities, for good and to improve their lot. So I think it's just a little bit sort of too narrow to paint them all with the one brush. And then I think you've got to think about, well, how do you define a gang? And if you're talking about association, there could be problems that flow from that if you start to make laws around that sort of thing. So I disagree with that, but also with the judge's discretion issue. I think that was to do, if I'm correct, that was to do with the discounts that judges are able to give, so that they can give like discounts for improvements or good behaviour, and so some of the judges have been giving up to 70% discount, and some of these criminals who've committed quite serious crimes are getting away with very light sentences. So I believe that what National is doing is limiting those discounts to about 40% or something, which makes sense to me. And but in general, I do like some of National's policies. I think the 3 strikes one, for example, is sensible. Okay. And I agree with Labor. Seems a little bit like a late starter.
Yeah, they've certainly been piling them out as we've seen this sort of crime wave take hold, that's for sure. Bruce, anything that looks positive to you?
Well,
What's missing?
Ella took the words out of my mouth. When she said lazy policy making. If lazy, I suppose, is too pejorative a word, then superficial, I would say. It doesn't really attend to what's going on in the culture at all, really. And I'm a bit worried about the limiting of judges' discretion as well. I'd like to see the detail of that. That concerns me. It's a little bit like fiddling while Rome's burning. I would like to see some serious attempt to look to set up a inquiry into a real look at the economic consequences or other kinds of consequences for that matter, but let's concentrate on the economic consequences of family disorder or family breakdown and see how that contributes to what's going on. Because underpinning all of these, or nearly all of them, is the role of the family and what's actually going on. This has to be sticking plaster. I don't see how it's much an advance in sticking plaster, really.
Yeah.
And it's not very sticky either.
Good point. And Lindsay Mitchell has written a report for Family First on that exact point, Bruce, and came to the same conclusion that you did. So you're on the same page. Right, there we go, team. We are just after 9 o'clock, so we are out of time. So thanks to all our viewers. Thanks to our panellists, especially Brendan coming in off the subs bench. Appreciate that, Brendan. Bruce, Christine, Cherie and Alla. And we're out of time, so we will see you next Monday night at 8 o'clock. You'll be counting down the hours, just like Alla is counting down the days. We will see you next Monday at 8 o'clock. See you.